This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Good morning, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to another great program on The Bridge on US Arab Radio and also live streaming on Facebook. Today, we're discussing a truly very timely, very important topic, the media war amid the Ukraine crisis. Everyone has been talking about what's happening in Ukraine, the events unfolding there, the suffering of the Ukrainian people, and definitely there is a very, very important component to this ongoing crisis and this ongoing war, which is for sure the media aspect. What is happening in terms of freedom of expression, citizen journalism, state propaganda, the different double standards in terms of covering the crisis, especially when it comes to refugees and their suffering and the humanitarian aspect of this unfolding crisis in Ukraine. What is the role of women correspondents and their coverage of the war? And what are the threats facing journalists and correspondents as they cover this war? We're going to discuss all of these topics and much more today with my guests from PEN America. We have with us this morning Nadine Farid Johnson, who is the Washington, D.C. director for PEN America. We have with us also Hannah Waltz, the U.S. Free Expression Program Director and Coordinator at PEN America. And we are hoping to have with us as well Polina Sodoskia, who is the Eurasia Program Director with PEN America. She's supposed to join from Tbilisi. She's having some connection issues, but we certainly hope she's going to be able to join us at some point in today's discussion as well. Welcome to the show, Nadine and Hannah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sahara. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Nadine, before we start to talk about what's happening in terms of the media war in Ukraine and everything that we are witnessing over there, especially in the media context and the ongoing, unfolding realities about propaganda and, different issues of disinformation and misinformation. Let's first start by giving our viewers and listeners everywhere a brief idea about PEN America. Can you please give us some background about it?
Absolutely, I'm happy to. So PEN America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we stand at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the US and worldwide. So what that means in terms of our international work, a major part of our work involves advocating for writers and intellectuals around the world who are facing serious repercussions, including imprisonment, harassment, and violence for their work. And in the United States, we are also active on free expression work, ranging from issues of press freedom to assembly rights, media literacy, digital technology, and local journalism.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to start with this whole notion of the role of journalists when they're covering war, when they're covering conflict, right? We're always talking about, journalism being, as we call it in Arabic, the profession of searching for troubles, right? We call it مهنة البحث عن المتاعب, or the profession of searching for troubles, right? And this cannot be more true in the context of war and in the context of conflicts. Can you give our listeners and viewers a brief idea about the responsibilities that journalists undertake when covering such a difficult and really hot topic like the Ukraine crisis, as well as some of the threats and dangers that they're also facing as well?
Sure, I can start a little bit and happy to turn it over to Hannah as well. I think when we're thinking about the role of journalists here, in addition to maybe searching for troubles from the Arabic saying, we're also looking at the search for truth. And right now, journalists have an incredibly difficult job, not only in reporting on the war, but also in sifting through the immense amount of state propaganda, disinformation, and misinformation that has been promulgated by the Russian authorities to really hide what's happening in Ukraine. So I think a lot of it is taking the effort to ensure that what they're reporting is truthful, to being able to tell stories on the ground, and again, sifting through the disinformation to find out what the kernels of truth are.
Right. We've also witnessed 5 journalists so far who has been killed in the midst of this war. It is very, very heartbreaking. I've just seen the statistic from Committee to Protect Journalists, and now the number has risen to 5 journalists who actually lost their lives, not to mention those who were injured, and had other types of threats and dangers that they're actually facing as well. So it's a noble duty for sure, and they actually face a lot of threats. Hannah, being also the coordinator for the US Free Expression Program with PEN America, I want to move to you with a question really about the word free expression, because it seems to me that a lot of people are unfortunately confused between facts and opinions. So they say things like, oh, why are they stopping, for example, some of the content that's coming out of Russia? Isn't everyone having the right for free expression, for expressing their thoughts, their ideas, their opinions? But I always say we have to draw a line between quote unquote facts and opinions. Can you please try to inform our listeners and viewers about some of these important distinctions, so to speak? When can we draw the line, and where should we draw the line between facts and opinions in the context of war coverage as we are seeing now in the Ukraine crisis?
Thank you, Sahar. And yeah, I would really just start with, simple media literacy skills. It's, knowing what you're reading, and that can just be some simple sifting through the page. So if something feels like a little bit on the opinion side of things, check it out. Maybe it says opinion in big bold letters at the top of the page that you're reading, or editorial, etc. Responsible journalism, this is what we always say, responsible, credible journalism is always very upfront about what it is. So it's not necessarily saying you should only read fact-based. Of course, you should focus on fact-based, but if you would like to read opinion journalism or editorial journalism, just be hyper aware that that is what you're reading.
Right, so it's important for us to have quote unquote media literacy skills. I cannot agree more. And maybe we need to define the term media literacy to our listeners and viewers. Hannah, can you please give us a definition for this term media literacy, which I think we need the most now, more than ever before?
Yeah, sure. So, to be frank, there are a lot of different definitions for media literacy. Some folks say news literacy, digital media literacy, et cetera, but it's really just the ability and having educating yourself to be able to find credible facts, knowing your news landscape, and having that digital citizenship and being responsible with it.
And I really believe that this kind of media literacy skills are much more needed now than ever before, right? We're seeing like young kids from the age of 2 and 3 years old holding their own digital devices on, I really am amazed. Like sometimes they have their own tablets, their own iPads, they're not looking or listening to their own parents. They're just with their own devices all the time. Would you recommend that this would be like media literacy to be something that we teach actually, even from the K to 12 level in schools, and of course at universities and beyond?
Oh, absolutely. That's the easiest question you've asked so far. I think it definitely starts at a younger age, and especially as we have a generation that is, as we're saying, digital natives. I think it kind of goes in both hands. There are folks that are, there are younger people that are extremely savvy on the internet with their devices. And there are others that maybe haven't had the concentrated effort to become, as we say, media literate. And so I think it becomes both. And I think we have to work across the generations for this as well.
Absolutely. I think now more than ever before, we really, really need these media literacy skills. And if we can make them part of educational curriculum from K to 12 and even at the college level and beyond, I think that would be really important. So Nadine, let me go to you with a question. I'm also going to share the same question with Hannah about disinformation and misinformation, right? So whenever you have conflict, whenever you have crisis, whenever you have war, that is a very, fruitful environment, let's say, for the spread, unfortunately, of misinformation and disinformation. Nadine, can we start with the definition of these two terms, and how can we define them and distinguish them from each other for our listeners and viewers, please?
So, actually, I'll turn to Hannah for the definitions of the two. So this is her area of specialty, and I can talk a little bit about what it looks like in terms of state propaganda.
Okay, so Hannah, would you like to start with the definition of these two terms, and how can we distinguish disinformation from misinformation?
Sure, perfect pivot. So disinformation is false content that is spread with the intent to deceive. Misinformation, on the other hand, is false information that is perhaps spread accidentally. So oftentimes what we see is false information will start as disinformation coming from bad actors that have, an ultimate goal of influencing public opinion, for example, among other things, that then changes to misinformation as it's shared unwittingly by folks on the internet or otherwise. And so it's the difference is really in the intent.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Hannah. And Nadine, going to you after Hannah gave us the definitions, with how can we possibly see examples of both of these, disinformation and misinformation, playing out in the context of the Ukraine crisis? Can you give us a few examples and maybe link that also to the concept or the principle of state propaganda?
Sure, absolutely. So what we're seeing here is, if you look at what disinformation in terms of Hannah's definition, where it's actually being sent in with the intent to deceive, it really is thriving on emotions, right? And war is emotional. So what we're seeing is information that is trying to deceive individuals about what is happening on the ground in Ukraine, and also therefore trying to insulate the Russian government from its actions on the ground. And that then spreads into misinformation, because people who may not have the media literacy that we need in order to understand what's happening, what they're reading is actually false information, and they spread it with the idea of wanting to maybe assuage someone's fears, right? Again, looking at that emotional example. We've heard examples of, for example, individuals who are on the ground in Russia fighting, talking to their, in Ukraine fighting, talking to their families in Russia and saying, I'm in the midst of an attack, in the midst of a war, and the parents in Russia saying, we haven't heard anything about this. We don't think that's actually true. So it really does affect the populations that are potentially the most vulnerable in a way that is meant to, again, shield the government from any kind of dissent or criticism.
Right. So that really takes me to another question, which is like, the state also responsibility. Obviously, there's a wide margin when it comes to, talking about things like state propaganda. Okay. Because sometimes I get asked the question, okay, why are you putting all the blame on the Russian government and talking about the Russian government in a negative light and saying they're spreading propaganda? There is no such thing as quote unquote 100% objective journalism anywhere in the world. Even Western media can have their own, pros and cons. They can have their own shortcomings. Sometimes they don't spread exactly, quote unquote, the truth 100%. So why are you, kind of really nailing down or somehow blaming the Russian government so much for the, the issue of propaganda? But I want to talk about this, margin of freedom really shrinking and stretching in different countries. And therefore, when we talk about the Russian government, there is definitely much more state propaganda, which could be linked to the spread of disinformation and misinformation. Hannah, can you comment on this and maybe give us a couple of examples of how this has been happening or unfolding in the context of the Ukraine crisis, please?
Sure, I can start. And also, Nadine and I tag team all the time, so maybe I'll throw it over to her as well. I think one of the most egregious examples that we've seen most recently is that, Putin's regime was putting out fake fact-checking examples. And so what we saw was they had designed what looked like a fact check on Ukrainian media. Oh, this is what they're showing you, but it's actually, there's a fact check on this, but it's actually, XYZ. What was happening was that they were, taking advantage of the discourse around mis and disinformation. They were taking advantage of the fact that there were other fact checks out there that were, spread in good faith. And so this is working with that psychological bit of, how do we know what is true, especially when we're saying we're actually fact checking it. And so this is probably the most egregious example that I would raise. But Nadine, I don't know if you want to speak to anything else.
I think that I'm sure the other thing is that they have actually now put into law a new fake news law, which is a phrase we are all too familiar with, unfortunately. And what they have done now is to start prosecuting people under that law for sharing truthful information about what's happening in Ukraine. So actually a famous blogger who was just prosecuted by the Russian Federal Investigatory Committee, and she has been prosecuted now under this law for giving out truthful information about what's happening in Ukraine and for chastising her government for taking these actions. And what they are calling it now is that she has put forth lies, she has put forth fraud, and they're actually now prosecuting people. Again, and that's an attempt not only to quash dissent and to silence people, but it also is its own form of disinformation, right? Saying that these people cannot possibly be telling the truth, and we are so concerned about the truth that we are going to now prosecute individuals who are speaking out.
This reminds me very much of the cybercrime laws in the Arab world that have been enforced, especially in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, when the government started to put in place cybercrime laws that would actually incriminate the journalists who are simply, sharing the truth, right? They're just sharing the truth. That's their only crime. And as we always say, journalism is not a crime, and it's not supposed to be, seen as a crime or punished as a crime. But unfortunately, that's what's happening in many places, not just in the context of the Ukraine crisis, but in many parts of the world, including in the Middle East, unfortunately. We'll come back to this very interesting and informative discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Ziyad brand, quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain. Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about a very important and really timely topic, which is the media war amid the ongoing Ukraine crisis. And with me this morning are 2 experts from PEN America. Ms. Nadine Farid Johnson is the Washington, D.C. director of PEN America, and Ms. Hannah Waltz is the US Free Expression Program Coordinator with PEN America. I want also still shed light on this notion of disinformation/misinformation as it actually played in the context of the Ukraine crisis and is still playing out in the context of this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is actually having regional as well as international effects and implications. We have seen examples of really stark disinformation and misinformation coming out, especially from the Russian side, when we talk about the attack that happened on the nuclear plant in Ukraine, when we talk about saying that the Ukrainians are the ones who are somehow creating obstacles in the talks or the negotiations, which is absolutely not the case. There are so many examples. I would like to start with Nadine and then move on to Hannah to give us a few real examples that really struck you in terms of the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and orchestrated state propaganda. If you can give our listeners and viewers a few examples in the midst of this conflict, that would be great. I'll start with you, Nadine, and then move to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Sahar. And I'm so glad our colleague Polina was able to join us just now. So what we've actually seen here in terms of the disinformation and misinformation, you're exactly right that there have been these efforts to combat the truth about what's happening on the ground with efforts to turn away from the reality. And what's happened is actually they have been peppering the airwaves with false flags about what is actually occurring in terms of that there is no war happening, that this is just a military operation, that it is all within normal context of essentially like peacetime action. And I want to talk a little bit about where that's going in terms of how people are trying to react to it, because what's ended up happening is that governments, the EU, for example, and more recently the UK, have completely banned the RT and Sputnik channels in order to try to stem that tide of the propaganda and to stop it. And what's ended up happening then is that it's the concern is, how does this now result in a potential backfiring where there is reciprocation on the part of the Russian government, which will increase their ability to more easily restrict their own people from having true information on what's happening, and then it will continue to promulgate this disinformation that leads to misinformation as well.
Okay, excellent. Hannah, you want to also comment on a few examples maybe of disinformation and misinformation in the context of this ongoing crisis, please?
Sure, yeah. And, I would love to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about, to kind of expand our definition of what disinformation can be. I think there's kind of this narrow view, and of course there are tons of examples of this, but there's this kind of narrow view that it's just miscaptioned photos or videos, or very explicit information that's being pushed into the airways, as Nadine said. But I think it can look like a lot of different things. We talk about this in our new tip sheet on how to combat mis and disinformation about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And one that I want to draw our attention to is this very calculated employment of whataboutism. So kind of deflecting away from the conflict at hand to really kind of again like distract folks. And so this may not be like the most familiar form of mis and disinformation that people see, but part of distracting us and part of the whole game that Putin's regime is playing right now is to misinform us about what the actual focus of the conflict is. So that, and I think bringing back to the false fact checking, I think I'm just like really floored by that example. And so I just want folks to really understand that it can look like many different things and to kind of expand our definition. Thanks.
Okay, Sahara, you raised a really good example that I think we can follow up on when you talked about what was happening in Chernobyl, where the Kremlin claimed that its takeover of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was part of some orchestrated response to Ukrainian efforts to build a dirty bomb. And I think what we've seen is an escalation in their attempts to change the narrative, the more they become entrenched in the conflict. So in recent days, they also claimed that the US had been operating a biochemical laboratory within Ukraine. That's another example of that. And I think that there was, I mean, actually the entire beginning of this started with something that they were trying to enter Ukraine in order to stop Nazism, right? So for the very foundation of this was based on disinformation.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought up the examples of the, quote unquote, chemical / biological weapons, because, as we know, Jake Sullivan, said that a number of U.S. top administrators said that this is usually a technique used by the Russian government if they want to use, this type of chemical or biological weapons themselves. They're gonna use this kind of disinformation and misinformation about the U.S. somehow enabling the Ukrainians
exactly
to use
right.
this type of weapons as a way to actually justify their own usage of this type of very dangerous weapons. So Polina is now joining us. Polina Sadoskia, who is the Eurasia Program Director for PEN America. Polina, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Sahar. It's a pleasure to be here, and I sincerely apologize for being late for the program, but I'm happy to jump in right away.
We are very happy to have you join us as well. And Polina, besides your work in this area of free expression and freedom of the press, you're also a native of Russia yourself. You were born in Russia. I believe that's your country of birth. So I would really like to focus with you on the public opinion inside Russia, right? I want to know, how are the Russian people taking all of this? How are they actually absorbing this whole narrative, or conflicting narratives, I should say, around the Ukrainian crisis and what is actually happening there? Because I've seen some, polls and some surveys that said it's 50-50. 50% believe the Russian government's narrative, and 50% do not believe it. So can you please inform our listeners and viewers about how is the Russian public opinion being shaped by all of this?
Yes, sure. Well, I should say that most of the polls are conducted by the state institutions, so we probably shouldn't be believing them. And also there is some, of course, a lot of fear among Russian people. And even if they are asked what side they are on, they probably wouldn't say the truth because of this fear. So we should definitely understand that. I think I would start answering this question specifically pointing out that President Vladimir Putin is in power for more than 20 years. And for all these 20 years, he was deliberately trying to eliminate, suppress the independent media. And without independent media, like, I cannot stress enough how the importance, the role of independent media for the public opinion on such issues as we are facing right now. Without independent media, it's very hard for the general public to understand what's going on, because the amount of money that is spent for the state propaganda is really enormous, and it's not only face the outside world, but inside world specifically, inside the country. I mean, the population inside the country specifically. So of course, I admire and really, like, I cannot imagine what those people who understand what's going on and who cannot keep silent, what they are going through, because, you know, only in few days of since the beginning of war, there were tens of thousands of people detained on the streets. And you should understand that these people, they in 2022, those people who go on the streets, these are people who know that they can lose all. Like, if previously going on the streets in Russia could lead them to like 15 days in prison and then all the consequences that follow, but now we are talking about like 16 years in prison for it, and it's applied so randomly that only creates this fear.
Mm-hmm. And we have seen, of course, all of these, you know, people going out and protesting, right, against the war in Russia, many of them actually being brutally beaten and imprisoned, arrested, paying a high price for this type of free expression. And also, Paulina, a question for you about the journalists who are actually fleeing Russia. I've seen also a number of writers, reporters, journalists, correspondents who cannot do their work inside Russia safely. They cannot really report on what's going on, transparently. So they decide to actually leave the country and to exercise their journalistic work from abroad. Can you please comment on this phenomena as well?
Absolutely, of course. Well, I should mention that on a few days ago, there was this law adopted in Russia that was saying that everyone who reports on what is going on in Ukraine cannot call it war. I think Nadine mentioned this earlier, and also has to only use the official materials, like the information from official sources. And as you can imagine, this is clearly the end of independent journalism in Russia. And right after this law was adopted, first two major medias were just liquidated: the Echo of Moscow and TV Rain. They took all their editorial rooms out of the country. They like it doesn't exist anymore. Those who still try to kind of operate within this law, such as Novaya Gazeta, for example, they are forced to cut all the information, or like put it in brackets, or like do some crazy things just to be able to survive. So after the editorial rooms, like in full, are leaving Russia, they are going to, of course, trying to understand what's going to happen next. And I should tell you that I meet a lot of them in countries like Armenia, Georgia, and I see that they decide to completely change their business model. And many of them are really thinking of creating a new media for people who left Russia after the beginning of this war, or those people who are completely lost. They are completely lost about their place in this world as Russians, because the Russian culture is as well under threat. And they must be someone talking to them, and this must be journalists and writers. So we shouldn't, of course, underestimate their role in this.
Absolutely. We're talking at the beginning of this show about journalism being the profession of searching for troubles. And I cannot think of a starker example. This is a very stark example of how this is very true. Unfortunately, these journalists are paying the price, a very heavy and hefty price, for really seeking the truth and sharing the truth. We'll come back to this very important and timely discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied. When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600. Enjoy the first Syrian-style cuisine in Michigan. At Damas Cuisine and Catering, you'll find a wide selection of Syrian foods and sweets in our menu, like frike, hoisin, grape leaves with steak, mishawi platter, hot mahashi, char-grilled kebab, shawarma, and much more. Get super fast delivery from Damas Cuisine and Catering right to your door. Order online at damascuisine.com/menu and track your order live. Damas Cuisine and Catering, 28841 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Call 248-987-4985.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We're talking today about a very important and timely topic, the media war amid the ongoing Ukraine crisis. And with me this morning are 3 experts from PEN America. We have with us Nadine Farid Johnson, who is the Washington, D.C. director of PEN America. We have Hannah Waltz, who is the U.S. Free Expression Program coordinator for PEN America, and Dr. Polina Sodoskia, who is the Eurasia Program director for PEN America. So Hannah, I want to start with you with a definition of the term citizen journalism and how it's really been playing out in the context of this conflict. A lot of people unfortunately mix the borderline or the boundaries between professional or mainstream media and journalism and citizen journalism sometimes become blurry, just like we were talking earlier in this episode of The Bridge about the blurry boundaries between facts and opinions and how some people confuse these two together and cannot tell the difference. Can we please explain to our listeners and viewers the boundaries that distinguish between mainstream media and citizen journalism and how this has been playing out in the context of this crisis, please, Hannah?
Sure. And I would love to hand this over to Polina after a quick definition as well, because I know that she'll have a lot to say as in terms of how it's playing out. But citizen journalism, as we understand it, is really just a collection and analysis of news and information by the general public, right? And so I think that this has been, especially given the accessibility of social media, this has been a really powerful way of communicating information in both Ukraine and Russia. And so I think it's really important for us to understand, or to, take the value of social media in this context, but also understand that there's less, it has to go through less fact checking and less regimented, credible journalistic standards. And so that we do have to take a little bit more care when we're absorbing that information. But Polina, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, my question actually to Polina as a follow-up to this point is about citizen journalists in Russia, right? So we talked about the professional journalists, how some of them, had to flee the country in order to be able to do their professional work because they cannot do it professionally and fairly and openly from inside Russia. What about citizen journalists, just the average citizen, right? How has this been, impacting or affecting citizen journalists in Russia?
Well, the thing is that if I can expand your question actually, and not only talk about Russia, but also Ukraine, because I think it's important to mention this in the context of our conversation. In terms of Russia, all the restrictive laws that were just expanding and their number grew, as I said, since the beginning of Putin's role in Russia, not just the journalism, but just like, using social media became extremely dangerous. As a representative of a literary organization, I can say that the role of cultural figures rose in this situation, and even prior in the previous century, this helped Russians to avoid censorship, just like talking about the same issues through the lens of creative people. But the regimes are also getting smart, and they are persecuting artists and writers as well, unfortunately. As for Ukraine, I think important to say that there was this recent report of the Institute of Mass Information. It's in the non-governmental organization in Ukraine, who just assessed, analyzed the impact on media during this war. So they had a report on war crimes of Russia against media and journalists. And something that is not that widespread, the information that is not so widespread, is that there are 70 media that were stopped their work because of the Russian invasion, this especially in this area where the military is taking over. So, of course, in this situation, citizen journalism is growing, and we saw this already in 2014 when the start of the Ukraine war actually began, and when Russia took over Crimea. There was a lot of journalists and there were a lot of citizens who would document the information, and later the non-profit organizations would collect them and later present them to the international institutions to seek for justice for. So yes, inevitably in the environment where the normal media cannot be sustainable, the citizen journalism is growing, and this is what we as non-profit organizations we are relying on.
Of course. And of course, as Hannah mentioned, this also carries its own threats and dangers, because you cannot really, fact check everything. There can be a lot of, again, going back to the point we were discussing earlier, disinformation and misinformation. These are not professional journalists, and therefore you cannot really hold them to the same standards like professional journalists when it comes to fact checking and making sure it is really trustworthy and accurate information. Nadine, let me come to you about a very important topic that we're going to talk about, which is really the internet regulation, right? So, so far, the internet has been a completely open space, meaning that anyone can post whatever they want. We have also seen a tug of war between the different parties involved in the Ukraine-Russia crisis, right? And their allies as well, the allies on both sides, those who support this side and those who support that side. And we have seen shutting down of different platforms, trying to kind of curb the amount of information or disinformation coming from this party or another. Can you please shed some light on this tug of war that's going on in cyberspace, Nadine?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll start by saying that PEN America actually is a signatory to a recent letter to the White House addressing this very issue. And what our position is, along with other civil society partners, is that we would urge all actors who are considering steps that would limit internet access to the Russian Federation or within the Russian Federation to really carefully consider the full impact of those measures, because our position is that access to the internet is essential. It's essential to the protection of freedom of expression, for access to information, truthful information, and free association. And it is increasingly recognized as a human right. So as you are correct, there is a tug of war in this realm, and we really need to figure out how best to ensure access to truthful information. And that means people inside the within Russia's borders, as well as external to it, and also to try to stem the tide of disinformation and misinformation taking over, right? So there are a couple of ways to look at this. As you've noted, there has been some action on the part of the platform. So social media platforms can and have taken some steps to ensure that Russian state media is not promoted in their algorithms or allowed to advertise on their platforms. And we have seen a number of the different platforms take that step, where they were no longer allowing that propaganda to become part and parcel of what people see when they log on. But there also needs to be, I think, a more considered approach to how people are able to gain access within the confines of the Russian borders. And there's actually precedent here from the Obama administration, because during the Obama administration, the Treasury Department at that time issued general licenses clarifying that companies could and should allow individuals from Iran and Syria, for example, to be able to access those free consumer-facing services. And we can do something similar here, where we can ensure that there would be general licenses to allow operation, and in a way that would, we really do want access to information for these individuals. We don't want to cut them off, but to also do so in a way where the social media platforms, and we've seen now some regulation that can work to counter some of the disinformation and propaganda that's coming out of the regime.
Mm-hmm. And following up on this point, I'll go to the question with Paulina about the shutting down of certain websites as well in Russia, right? It seemed to me like an act of retaliation, like there has been this, somehow regulation of some content that's coming out of Russia, or putting some restrictions on certain Russian media outlets. And in return, we have seen also Russia closing down or shutting down some social media websites. Would you like to comment on this and inform our listeners and viewers about it, please, Dr. Paulina?
Yes, fortunately, VPN still works, and people can access, even though still it's an obstacle. Yeah, we've seen just recently the shutting down of Instagram, very popular platform, and popular among people who consider themselves apolitical, and now they becoming very much political and upset about this fact. So I think they how do you say, a Russian government shoot themselves in the leg, or I'm messing up the phrases, yeah. So I think it's just it looks like, honestly, to me, from outside, as an agony, like what else we can close, so that people are just people fear more the retaliation. But the thing is that it might have a very opposite result, and honestly, I don't know. If any revolution happens in Russia, it will be very bloody, and I prefer not to think about it, to be honest. But I'm just seeing that the escalation goes so fast, and it's hard to predict what's going to happen. I suspect nothing good will happen out of that, to be honest.
It seems that governments are building their learning curves, but also, as you said, they're shooting themselves sometimes in the foot, right? Because sometimes when you try to regulate too much and shut down too much and control too much, it backfires. We have seen this in the Arab world in the midst of the Arab Spring uprisings, when you had, internet shutdowns and media blackout. Somehow it kind of inspired people to go out more and to revolt. We'll come back to this very interesting discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
بعد تطعيم أكثر من 3 بلايين شخص حول العالم بشكل كامل بلقاح كوفيد-19، تمت الآن الموافقة على تلقيح الأطفال من عمر 5 إلى 11 سنة. فقد أثبتت الدراسات بعد تجارب سريرية مع أطفال حول العالم أن جرعتي اللقاح المخصصة لهم آمنة وفعالة. يوصي الأطباء بتلقيح الأطفال من سن 5 فما فوق من أجل حماية الأصحاء منهم أو ذوي الظروف الصحية الصعبة. الطفل جزء من المجتمع وهو معرض لأن يصاب بالفيروس، ويمكن أن يحمله لعائلته ولمن حوله. احمي طفلك وعائلتك ومجتمعك. لقح طفلك ليكون بأمان في المدرسة أو مع العائلة والأصدقاء وأثناء ممارسة الرياضة. تحدث لطبيبك واكتشف الحقائق بنفسك، أو زر موقع michigan.gov/kidscovidvaccine. رسالة من وزارة الصحة والخدمات الإنسانية في ميشيغان.
يلا سوا يا حبي نسهر عند شام آيس كريم، يا ماما يسلم لي أكله أطيب من اللوز والتين، ياسمين الشام على خدك وحلاوة العسل بأكلك، اسم الله قمر يا قمر يا منور، شرفونا تعال عنا تعال عنا.
28857 Orchard Lake Marina Farmington Hills أو اتصلوا على 248-516-3130.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Albanjit Katranji, and at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about a very important topic on The Bridge. It is the media war amid the ongoing Ukraine crisis. And with me this morning are three experts from PEN America. Ms. Nadine Farid Johnson is the Washington, D.C. Director for PEN America. Ms. Hannah Waltz is the U.S. Free Expression Program Coordinator for PEN America. And Dr. Polina Sadoskia is the Eurasia Program Director for PEN America. Nadine, we have witnessed the quote-unquote double standards of Western media when it comes to the coverage of the ongoing crisis, especially when it comes to talking about refugees, right? We have seen some commentators and correspondents, unfortunately, saying, with all due respect, right, quote unquote, with all due respect, these are, somehow civilized people who are white, who are middle class, they're not like quote unquote others. And of course, there was a lot of response to that on social media. Would you like to comment on these types of double standards that we have been witnessing recently in this type of reporting, please?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll start by saying that the media has a responsibility to treat tragedies as what they are, which is tragedies. And it needs to steer clear from any kind of normalizing them in certain countries and certain regions. And I think that's the fear that what we've seen happening in terms of making the Ukraine situation seem like it's such an anomaly, and maybe not as much so in, say, Syria, for example, or other areas around the world where there has been more consistent conflict. But you're absolutely right, Sahar, that there needs to be a deliberate attempt to call this what it is, which is a tragedy, but not to do so, not to make it any more of a tragedy than anyone else who is suffering from these situations, particularly when it comes to the refugee crisis. We have seen examples of different countries opening their doors to refugees from the Ukraine crisis. And the narrative has certainly been different from what's happened, for example, with Syria, with Libya. We've seen it happen over and over. And so I think what we need to be able to do is to both recognize the dangers of reporting on these situations, right? Recognize that it is, and with all of these conflicts, when you cease to have kind of a quote unquote front line, whether someone is reporting from Syria, reporting from Libya, reporting from Ukraine, it is an incredibly dangerous situation. And we've seen that, so we need to recognize that first, and also recognize that irrespective of where one comes from or what is happening to them, that we are all in the same boat in terms of being humans who are suffering. And that needs to be the basis from which we do this reporting, and to bring truth to people who are accessing this information.
Absolutely.
And I would love to chime in here. Oh, sorry.
Please go
I
ahead.
would love to chime in here as from a view of media literacy. You know, I think that it's really important that we recognize that there's a certain level of cultural competency that comes with community journalists that are reporting from you know, a certain point of view. And so I think it's really important that we recognize this. It's part of our media literacy skills. I think it's, you know, something that came up in the very early days was this really stark and I thought full of clarity statement from the Arab and Middle Eastern Journalists Association. They released a statement addressing and condemning this racism in the coverage of Ukraine. And so I think I also want to like kind of frame it as both. We can, as Nadine said, we can recognize that there is a total tragedy happening in Ukraine. We can also recognize that there is, you know, biased and contorted reporting that can proliferate false and racist narratives. So it's really important to know that, you know, the public has this responsibility to arm themselves with media literacy skills to be able to recognize that. And this includes this, you know, base knowledge of psychological factors that can contribute to confirmation bias, et cetera. But as our definition of disinformation expands and shapeshifts, I think that it's crucial that we keep in mind that false content can come in many different ways in this sense as well, and it can be affected by biases.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree. And we just have like maybe a couple of minutes left in the program, and I cannot miss the opportunity to say, of course, that March is, as we all know, International Women's, you know, History Month, right? So, and I have these, you know, wonderful opportunity to have 3 women experts talking about this particular topic today. So I want to just in half a minute for each one of you quickly to say the role of women journalists in the midst of this, you know, we have 1 minute and 10 seconds actually. So very, very briefly, the role of women in the midst of this particular coverage, especially women journalists, and what kind of protections maybe can we put in place for them? So just half a minute, very quickly. Nadine, you want to comment on this very briefly?
Yes, I think that we need to have the same standards for protection of women as we do with any other journalists. We know that sometimes that journalists can be targeted, although that is a violation of international law, but we've seen it happen. We've seen it in Syria. We might have seen it now in what's happening in Ukraine. We do not yet have that information, but we need to ensure that we do have that protection that is universal.
Absolutely. Hannah, very quickly. You want to add something to that?
Sure. You know, I think that it's, you know, kind of to build on what Nadine was saying, that it's really important to especially support women and women identifying journalists, as we know that they're especially targeted with harassment, et cetera. So.
Absolutely. Dr. Polina, a final word very quickly.
Sure. I just want to also acknowledge all the brave women writers and cultural professionals who are still staying in Ukraine and don't want to leave because they want to play a role in defending their country.
Absolutely, absolutely. And from this program, from this platform, The Bridge on US Arab Radio, we're also sending a big salutation to all the journalists, reporters, correspondents who are courageous and brave enough to share the story and share the truth from every part of the world. And a special, really thumbs up to also to women journalists and correspondents. And thanks so much to the three of you for joining us today and sharing such great insight with our listeners and viewers. And thanks to our listeners and viewers everywhere. Thank you for being with us. Stay safe, stay well. Thank you so much, and goodbye.